This is part one of three shortish videos that I'm making to discuss the content of chapters 10 through 14, types of claims and writing arguments. This part one is just meant to be an introduction. Part two will be one particular set of claim types. Part three will be the other set of claim types. I'll get to that at the end of this slideshow. What do we mean when we talk about claim and argument? These are terms that we tend to use interchangeably, but in fact, they have a little bit different meaning. An argument, that is the paper that you're going to write, or the video that you're going to create, or the source that you're going to consume, is normally seen as a complete work. That's what an argument is. A claim is actually a component of that argument. It's a way of thinking about the position of the writer, of your position. It clarifies in some ways exactly what this argument is about. We can use different argument forms, one-sided, classical, dialogic, to argue different types of claims. And chapter 7 covers argument forms. We've talked about that already, and we'll come back to that later on as you get closer to writing your paper. And then the different types of claims are covered in chapters 10 through 14. We make a choice of what argument claim we're going to use based on our topic, based on the evidence, based on what kind of claim type that we fit it into. And then sometimes, and in fact, this is probably the most common, is actually to use more than one claim type, what our textbook calls hybrid arguments, in one kind of argument. So you may find yourself using two. You may start off with a paper that might be a definition argument that ends in a proposal, or you might have a cause and effect paper that also ends in a proposal. These are very common forms. But chapter 10 discusses this idea of hybrid arguments, so you should take a look at that. Here, of course, is what you don't want to do. You don't want to annoy people. You don't want to, finally figure out that your arguments aren't quite what you think they are, and all you end up doing is just irritating folks. So don't do that. Finding a claim type that's appropriate and using the pattern that it establishes can help you avoid this very common problem. So where do we start? The first place we start is what people in the rhetoric world call stasis. That is, where do you stand? What's your position? And how did you come to that position? And what is the basis for that position? Is it your beliefs and values and attitudes? Is it research-based, which is the best kind? What position do you hold? And then you have to assume that you're in some ways in a point of disagreement with some parts of your audience. And that's important because that's going to make you use a claim type that's going to help you expand your argument to reach as many people as you can. The least effective arguments are what we call one-sided ones. That is, the ones that only talk to people who already agree with you. What some people call preaching to the choir, which I don't think is a very felicitous term, but it's probably the more common way of referring to it. That's the least effective argument. Just like an argument that's based solely on pathos, audience-based reasons, is also the least effective because it's not really reaching out to the people you want to move, which are people who don't necessarily agree with you. In all likelihood, however, you're also going to have points of agreement with an audience. There are going to be places where you hold the same beliefs and values, that this Toulmin idea of warrant that we've talked about before. So stasis is a complicated matter. It's not as simple, perhaps, as here's what I believe and here's what I think. You've got to think about what does the audience think. And we're going to be talking about that when we do some audience analysis later on. So after you figured out where you stand, then you develop your enthymeme, your incomplete claim that we've talked about before, your position on your topic with a because clause, plus your reasons. And that will kind of list out in an incomplete form what you intend to argue about. And then, of course, the audience provides the assumptions, the beliefs, and the values of their own that help you make this argument complete. Okay. So one of the ways to think about this is to meet audience where they already are and move them from there, wherever they are, to where you want them to be. And I'll be talking about more specific examples as we go through this. At this point, I think it's just clear that you need to understand the process, and that that's the most important part. One final point on this slide, many times we use the term claim and we use the term thesis statement, and they are fundamentally very similar. That's why I have the little almost equal to sign here. In this particular line. They're very similar. And so the construction of a thesis statement, the construction of a claim are very similar. Here's an example, and this is one that, whether I believe or not believe on it is irrelevant. The whole point of this is just to give you an example. Okay, we can reduce school shootings, that's the position, by arming and training teachers. So that's my position, that's the topic, reducing school shootings. What's my belief? What's my claim? Arming and training teachers. Why do I believe this? Because armed teachers would decrease response time and deter shooters. Okay, and that's what many people argue when it comes to this. What's the stated set of assumptions here? What do you think is in your audience head? Well, do school shooters really think about the possibility of confrontation? Do they expect to be shot? Do they expect to see a police officer? Or are they so unbalanced at the time that they commit these actions that they don't think about this? And we have examples on both sides, of course. The assumption, police are unresponsive. Students in rural schools where the response time may be 30 minutes, they tend to look at this as a reason to arm teachers. By the way, those of you who are Missourians may or may not know that there are 5 school districts in Missouri, almost all rural ones right now, where teachers are permitted to carry weapons in a K through 12 school. They're concealed. Are there any other external factors that we can control? Other ideas, other people's points of view? These are the kind of things that you have to think about when you develop a claim. But my basic claim here is topic and why I hold the views that I do. And again, these are not necessarily my views. So once we get that, we then say, okay, well, what kind of claim type is this? And again, we'll go through the 5 in the next 2 videos. And what do we do this for? Well, it helps clarify what the argument's about. Is it a definition argument? Is it cause and effect? Is it a proposal? Is it evaluation? What is it? Understanding what those things are will help us next organize our argument into a pattern that people can understand. And you'll find in chapters 10 through 14 a variety of templates that you can follow that will help you with your papers. If you say, well, I think I've got a resemblance argument here, that's chapter 11. You can then look up in chapter 11 a sample paper. You can see a template in chapter 11 that will help you figure out how to organize your own paper. Okay. And as you can see, these help you with those 3 classic appeal types. Organization is fundamentally a logical appeal, but if it's organized in a way that makes sense and takes into account the needs and values of the audience, that's actually a form of ethos that expands your credibility. And it also gives the audience something to hang their hat on, something with which they're familiar, or something with which they can say, oh, I am expecting this piece to come next and that piece to come third and so on. And that's actually a form of pathos, although our textbook doesn't quite make that claim. Our textbook gives you basically 5 different claim types, and they divide these into 2 groups. The first group I'll talk about in the next video are what they call claims about the nature of truth or the nature of reality. What we call a definition claim is something, is X or Y. A resemblance claim is X like a Y. A causal claim, or what you might be more familiar with as a cause and effect, does X cause Y. The second group that our textbook talks about are values claims. These are ones that are a little bit more subjective because we have to use our own values or take into account the values of others to make the case that we make. Is X a good or a bad Y? That's an evaluation claim, and we'll show you some different kinds of those. And then proposal claims. Should we do X? What's a good reason to do one thing over another? Why is this the best solution? So Part 2 will talk about these 3 claim types. Part 3 of this video series will talk about these values types. So stay tuned.